Hey everyone, I'm Robert Mann, and today I want to talk to you about the difference between a building designer and a registered architect. Or put another way, what does it take to become a registered architect in Australia? Now, if you're looking to engage an architect or interested in pursuing a career in architecture yourself, it's important to know that there's a few differences and certain requirements that must be met in order to be recognized as a registered architect, capital A. There are a few exceptions to these rules, particularly for international architects or architects that have studied overseas and have a recognized qualification. But as a general rule for locals, this will normally mean that you need to have a degree in architecture, a Bachelor of Architecture Design, or formerly known as Architecture Science. Now, this is the undergraduate degree, 3 years, and then this is followed by a Masters of Architecture, and this was formerly the second Bachelor of Architecture. This changed over in about 2007, 2008, when I completed my double degree Bachelor at the University of Newcastle. Now, most universities also require students to take time off between the degree and the Masters to gain more practical experience in the industry. And of course, this means that many don't actually return to complete their Masters and just continue working with their Bachelor degree. Now, if you're still on board, now that you've completed these 5+ years of tertiary education, you need to gain more practical experience. And this is in a broad range of architectural processes or elements of being an architect. Now, this is all the way from design, which is maybe the fun stuff, through to contract administration. And as a recent graduate, it's not that common that you would have exposure to that back end, dealing with clients, writing contracts, overseeing the construction. So it's not common that that would normally happen as a recent graduate. And so therefore, at a bare minimum, it's going to take 2 years of practical experience, but it could take much longer. Now, make sure that you log this experience as you go, or it might be a lot harder to put together later. Then, once you've gained all that practical experience, then you need to prove your understanding, that you understand the business of architecture, the legal side of architecture, and the regulations. And you need to do this in an exam. Back to university, effectively. Hopefully you still remember this from uni, or you use it daily in your work, in your business. Otherwise, you've got more studying to do. Now, finally, after sitting this paper exam, then you also need to face a panel of architects who will test you in an interview style on any topic that they feel that you might need more experience. Now, historically, this interview exam has a fairly low pass rate, and many people need to resit it. If you pass, the testing is now done, and you can legally, finally, call yourself an architect. Well, that is, of course, as long as you're willing to pay the annual licensing fees, the insurances, of course, act in a professional manner as a registered architect and keeping the codes of conduct. And keep studying for the rest of your life to stay up to date with the latest changes, the local legislation, state and federal government, as well as the architectural products and the construction practices and the codes and the standards, which of course keep changing over time as well. And that all falls under the banner of CPD, or Continuing Professional Development. Well, what if you don't want to do all of that? If you opt out anywhere along this process, you legally cannot call yourself an architect or face ramifications for misrepresentation. So what are you? Technically, you could call yourself, if you did the Bachelor or the Masters of Architecture, you could call yourself a graduate of architecture. No, you cannot call yourself an architect or a graduate architect, only a graduate of architecture. If you want a better title than that, really the only way to do it is you're a building designer. So legally, you're not an architect, you're a building designer. Now, this is a tricky part, because you could be a building designer with a Masters of Architecture. You could be a building designer with a diploma from TAFE, or you could be a building designer with no qualifications at all. A building designer could have lots of experience or no experience at all. The problem is, for a potential client, it might not be easy to determine whether the person that you're trying to engage to do your project has the experience or has the qualifications that you're after. Obviously, this is an issue, and the building design industry is aware of this and trying to become more accredited to resolve this discrepancy or resolve the fact that you don't need a particular qualification necessarily to be called a building designer, like you would to be called a registered architect or an architect. So the first question was, what's the difference between an architect and a building designer? The point is, there could be no difference. An architect and a building designer might have all of the same experience, might have all of the same education. They may have even the same qualifications. So there may not be any difference between a building designer and an architect, or there might be a huge difference between a building designer and an architect. Typically, we might say that an architect is maybe more design focused, or we might say that they're more detailed orientated, or maybe they're going to run the project with the client the whole way through and manage the process from design all the way through until completion. Whereas a building designer might be maybe more just focused on doing drawings, maybe just doing the DA drawings or just doing the CC drawings, and that might be the end of it. I once had a building designer look at my work when I was talking with him, and he said, "Why do you do so much drawings? It's a waste," right? So his opinion was that a building designer doesn't need to do that many drawings, that it's unnecessary to go to that level of detail. My point of view was, well, if I want this building to be built properly, if I want the design to shine through in the construction, I need to explain it. I need to really carefully detail that, communicate that to the builder, and then walk through that whole process to make sure that the building ends up the way that it was supposed to be designed in the first place. If you're interested in understanding more about this topic, you can check out the AIA, the Australian Institute of Architects website. Now, the AIA is a member body of architects. It's not the actual recognition part of it. Another great resource is the Architectural Practice Examination Board, or the APEB, and they're the ones that are responsible for the National Architectural Practice Exam. Or if you're interested in information on building designers, you can check out the BDAA. That's the Building Designers Association of Australia. Finally, remember that the requirements for registered architects in Australia might change over time. So it's best to check with the relevant registration boards for the most up-to-date information. That's it for now. I hope this information is helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.